The story I'm about to share with you, you're going to think is an exaggeration. And I know preachers have a tendency to exaggerate, but I promise you, this story happened exactly like I'm about to tell it. I had been invited to preach at a particular church on a Sunday morning, and my wife and I drove up there Saturday afternoon and were there Saturday evening. I was going to preach the next morning on declaring the glory of God to the ends of the earth and giving our lives to making the gospel known in all nations. The night before, on Saturday night, my wife Heather and I were sitting in one of the deacons' homes. There was two deacons and their wives and the pastor and his wife. We were sitting around talking, and they were asking, this is a church that had been incredibly supportive of me, had even had a group that had prayed together and would just periodically send us a check when we were in seminary, and we'd never asked for anything like that, just very, very kind. And so they were asking us about how things were going in life and ministry. And so we shared with them about opportunities God was opening up in the inner city where we were doing ministry, and then particularly in tough places in the world where it is not easy to go and proclaim the gospel, and where people are oftentimes against you being there sharing the gospel. And it was at this point that one of the deacons sat up in his chair and said, "David, I think it's great that you're going and doing all of those different things." He said, "Places like that, though, in the world, I just assume God annihilate all those people and send them to hell." It's exactly what he said. You asked me what I said in response. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. Stunned into silence. And the conversation went on like nothing had just happened. And I thought, okay, I'm going to talk tomorrow about declaring the glory of Christ to the ends of the earth. This is going to be interesting. And so I got there the next morning, and the pastor got up before I preached, and he was welcoming folks. And then I'm not sure what inspired this, but he went into a tangent about how thankful he was to live in the United States of America, and how there was no chance he would ever live anywhere outside of the United States of America. All of the freedoms that we have, and this, I thought there were amens firing left and right. I thought Lee Greenwood was about to pipe in the background. We're going to stand and cross our hearts, and so I'm about to preach on going outside of the United States of America. And so I preached, I hope, with grace. That morning, not a lot of response at the end. And I walked down to the front, and before the service was closed out, the pastor got up and he said, "David, we just want you to know how excited we are about what God's doing around the world and your involvement in that." And he said, "We want to commit today to," and these are his exact words, he said, "we want to commit today to continue to send you money so that we don't have to go and do that ourselves." At this point, my wife, who's standing behind me, like, she puts her hand on my shoulder, like she thinks I'm about to take this guy down. And he continued on. He said, "The last church I pastored," and these were his words, "we had a missionary from Japan who came and spoke. And he said, I told my congregation that if they did not give to this missionary, that I was going to pray that God would send their kids to go serve with him." Like it was a threat. And he said that congregation gave. It worked. So I get in the car that afternoon with Heather, and we drive away, and I'm processing what has just happened, and what I've heard over the last 24 hours, and there was a range of emotions, just sadness, anger. But it was one of those times where God kind of turns the tables a bit, and I began to think, maybe that deacon and that pastor said what most Christians in our context believe, but are just not bold enough to say. And I don't I don't want to be too brash, but are we not avoiding the tough inner cities? And we would not say, we would just assume God annihilate people in other countries and send them to hell. But if 1.6 billion of them have never heard the gospel, then is that not where they will go? Have we not created an entire system that is built on sending a check so that we don't have to go ourselves? And are we really praying that God would raise us and our children up to go to the toughest places in the nations to take the gospel? And so I guess it comes back to, what do we really believe about people who've never heard the gospel? Because if they will go to heaven, then it would make sense for us to spend all of our millions and our resources and our time on ourselves here. But if they are perishing and will go to an eternal hell, not having ever heard this gospel, then we must abandon all of our lives and our resources in the church to get the gospel to them. It was said of Spurgeon when he was asked, "Will the heathen who have never heard be saved?" And Spurgeon responded, "The real question is whether or not those who have received the gospel and are not taking it to those heathen really can be saved at all." So what happens to people who never hear about Jesus? I am convinced this is one of the most important questions facing us in the church. Unfortunately, as you know, there's not a place we can go to in Scripture where Jesus says, some of you might wonder what happens to people who never hear about me. And so I want to clear that up for you. But I don't believe the Bible is silent on this issue. And so I want to bring us to Romans chapter 15. And here's why I want to bring us to Romans chapter 15. Look with me at verse 20, where Paul is giving us a glimpse into his life and ministry, and even deeper than that, the purpose for which he has written the book of Romans. Start in the middle there in verse 20, in the middle of his argument, but I want you to see what's going on. He says, "Thus I make it my ambition to preach the gospel, not where Christ has already been named, lest I build on someone else's foundation. But as it is written, those who have never been told of him will see, and those who have never heard will understand. This is the reason why I have so often been hindered from coming to you. But now, since I no longer have any room for work in these regions, and since I have longed for many years to come to you," listen to verse 24, "I hope to see you in passing as I go to Spain, and to be helped on my journey there by you, once I have enjoyed your company for a while." Now, a little historical background here to what Paul is talking about. I want you to look at a couple of maps up here on the screen with me. And I want you to see, you won't be able to see the minute details in this map, but I hope you'll be able to see the overall picture. We'll show one map up here. Okay. On the right, far eastern part of this map, you see red and blue arrows coming together. That is Antioch. Acts chapter 13 is when God, by His Spirit, raises up Paul and Barnabas to leave Antioch and go on their first missionary journey. On this map, the blue arrows coming out from the far right over there are they're leaving out. You see, they went down to the islands of Cyprus and then went up to Pisidian Antioch, other places. And you know, they're preaching the gospel, they are being persecuted, they're planting churches. And then they come back, the red arrows show them coming back, and they came back to where? Antioch. It was their home base of Christian mission. They come back and they encourage the believers there. That sets the stage for missionary journey number 2. Look at this next map with me. It's a little larger because the scope of where Paul traveled is bigger. Again, on the far right part of this map, midway up, that's Antioch. And you'll see he leaves and he goes to the places that he's already been before. And that's when God gives him that Macedonian call and says, come over here to help us. And so he goes farther north and he goes to places like Thessalonica and Corinth. He comes back down close to the middle of this map to Ephesus, and then in the bottom right corner of this map to Jerusalem. And then he heads back where? Antioch, home base. And he camps out there again, encouraging the brothers and sisters. That sets the stage for missionary journey number 3. Next map he leaves, he goes, he's retracing his steps, and when he gets to Corinth, which is in the top left quadrant of this map, when he gets to Corinth, he's headed down to Jerusalem to take an offering there. And there in Corinth, he writes the book of Romans. Now, why does he write this book at this time? Let me show you one additional map that I think helps us understand it. You look on this map, on the far right, again, the eastern portion of the map, you've got Antioch and Jerusalem. In the very middle of this map, you have Rome. And in between them is Corinth. And then on the far western part of this map, the left part of this map, you see Spain. Paul writes this book from Corinth, saying, I want to get the gospel to places that have never heard. Now, if he wants to go specifically to Spain where they have not heard the gospel, then it would not make much sense for Antioch on the far eastern part of this map to be the home base for getting him there. He wants to get the gospel to Spain, so the church at Rome is the most logical place to help him get to Spain. And so he writes the book of Romans, yes, to give us a masterful treatise, maybe the most masterful treatise on the gospel in Romans 1 through 8. But it's deeper than just that. He is writing this to the church to show them why we must get this gospel to people who've never heard it before, and why they need to help him get there. As a result, I think the book of Romans is the perfect place to go to consider why we would need to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, particularly those who have never